So one of the reasons we see all this care put into the urban planning of these large-scale cities is that because the inhabitants of those cities are incredibly productive members of the overarching economy, right? These cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, are filled with craft production activities, and those are well planned, but they're not necessarily controlled by an elite in the same way we would see kind of attached workshops in the palaces or temples at Giza or in Uruk or within the Akkadian dynasty. Right. What we do see are distinctive neighborhoods that are centered around craft production activities. We can see a lot of planning that goes into where pyrotechnic installations, that is, pottery kilns and the metal furnaces, are located, and those appear to be located in clusters, in which suggests some kind of organized or community-based or guild-based industrial activity. And that's kind of what you see here. Here you can kind of see a cluster of metal producing furnaces associated here at an excavation at an Indus Valley site. So there's a lot of care within these furnaces, small scale product for the productions of bronzes and smelting of copper or gold. Uh, this is a well-preserved pottery kiln on the outskirts of the same archaeological site that we see here. I believe this is Rakagiri in northwest India. So what we can kind of look at is these major craft productions activities are being conducted for trade. And we know that a lot of these goods are being made in Indus Valley civilizations and making their way to Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even China at the time. So the activities that we identify at sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are things like lapidary production. And lapidary is the cutting, polishing, or engraving of gems and stones. So this is the production in lapis lazuli, agate, steatite, carnelian, amethyst, turquoise, and marine shell that are all being produced and made into beads and bangles and stone seals that are being then brought to on a large scale to locations like Mesopotamia and Egypt. And if we kind of look at this through Egyptian prehistory, for example, at the height of the middle to late Harappan period, we're talking here is the Middle Kingdom, and most of the carnelian and lapis lazuli that we see being used in Egyptian jewelry is coming from mines in the Indian subcontinent and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. And it's the groups here in the Harappan Indus Valley that are controlling access to those resources. They're likely taking those first stages of production and making bead blanks or the beads themselves that are then traded through the Persian Gulf or through the Red Sea by seafaring vessels within Harappan society to Egypt and Mesopotamia. We also see the production of cotton textiles, and cotton textiles would become such an important activity, the production of these textiles in the ancient world, or even into the modern world, that it largely explains British colonial interest in India in the 17th and 18th century. So the cotton textiles become an incredibly important craft production activity. But we also see the smelting of copper, bronze, and gold that are all then being brought out in jewelry, in gold leaf, in weapons, and statuettes like what you see here. This is the dancing girl of Mohenjo-Daro, and this is one of the most famous archaeological bronzes from the Indian subcontinent. Mortimer Wheeler kind of argued that this was a dancing girl, but we really don't know whatever it is. But it does show the skill and the techniques of bronze casting using lost wax production techniques from within Harappan society. Now, the other kind of really fascinating thing is that we see some kind of level of difference. There are beads that are produced out of these relatively rare gems like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and amethyst, but we also see mock beads that are made out of faience. And that's a ceramic that's then glazed in lead or tin to give it a kind of metallic or symbolic or metallic look that makes it look like one of these gemstones. And so what you can kind of see here are beads that are being produced out of carnelian and lapis lazuli, but also the faience beads that are and shell that are meant to kind of mimic that within at the site of Harappa. So we have these kind of craft productive activities, and I think the stoneworking and the textiles are incredibly important for the overarching economy of the Indus Valley civilization. Now, the other thing that we can see are these intricate stamp seals. These appear to have been associated with craft production and trade. Wealthy craft producers or merchants would have had their own seals to identify their goods, facilitate their trade, and we can see a lot of these are largely mythological animals. Or like the unicorn, this is the most famous one. But on top of each of these seals, we also have the Indus script that is meant to identify them. Now, to date, there's a lot of Indus writing that shows up on these seals and inside of Harappan uh, settlements, but we don't have a translation for it. We don't know what this text says. There's nothing that's been found that can kind of cross-translate it to, say, Bronze Age Chinese or Akkadian and Mesopotamian. So we're still kind of left in the dark, looking for more and more of these. And unfortunately, most of the writing that we see is relatively short, maybe 5 to 10 characters. Right? So we're not looking at incredibly long sentences or structures, which means it may be words or simple commands that are associated with this. So our most common representations are animals, but there are a few humanistic reliefs, like what you see here, this individual fending off 2 tigers, or the seated individual with the ram's horns fighting a tiger and a bull, or in between a tiger and a bull. Now, a lot has been made about this particular seal as representing the earliest representations of Shiva or the Buddha, or trying to tie it to modern religious practices in the Indian subcontinent. I think that's all a stretch. But what we do see here is some kind of symbolic understanding of the importance of these large-scale mythical, these large-scale animals like the rhinoceros, the elephant, the tiger, and the water buffalo, for as symbols of power and control for the individuals within Harappan society. We can also see the earliest use, or some of the earliest use in India, of the swastika, and this is a typically has kind of negative connotations with the Nazi regime, but the swastika in subsequent Indian tradition is a way to make order out of chaos. And I think this is a lot of the ways we can start to look at the representations of these animals. And seals here are a way to kind of exert control over the chaotic nature of humanity, of nature itself, and of trade in a lot of senses. The other thing we can see within Harappan society is an emphasis on standardization. Right, this large-scale centralized planning would have required an understanding of how to conduct it. Right, so we see bricks are made using uniform molds across the entirety of the 1,500 sites we see archaeologically, and there are standardized units of measurement, a distance within archaeological planning. There's a foot and a cubit that more or less corresponds to 30 centimeters and 60 centimeters. In length. So there is a standard unit of measurement within urban planning to talk about the length of streets and the size of houses. And we also see early weights, systems of weights, that the large block more or less corresponds with roughly a kilogram. So we can kind of look at this and see these large systems of weights to measure on down in uniform senses. They're kind of divisible as an exponential scale, right? A quarter to a half, or whatever the actual idea of the weight system is. They measure out in corresponding doubling terms, and so these scales would have facilitated trade. And those trade connections are incredibly important. The raw materials used in the Indus Valley civilization come from throughout Central and South Asia. They're marshaled from the areas of the Himalayas, Afghanistan, through the Indian subcontinent. They're gathered in the Indus Valley system, like lapis lazuli, carnelian, and that's what you see up here, gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, that's making up this bracelet that was found in the Royal Cemetery of Ur. All of this originates from the Indus River Valley civilization. So these are highly valued by Mesopotamian Egypt. Now we see iconographic evidence of flat-bottom boats. These show up both in this terracotta model from Mohenjo-Daro, but also in iconographic representations and seal carvings. And these flat-bottom boats are similar to those that are used in the Indus River Valley today, and we know that they can be easily equipped with a sail for sea travel. So we have extensive evidence, both in the glyptic evidence, but also in figurative representations of the use of these boats. There's also a lot of archaeological material coming from the UAE and Oman that shows intricate connections for the ruling individuals in those societies who are using Harappan style pottery and Harappan goods to mark their social distinctions. So we